Lily. Thank you everyone for being here. It's like, I'm so excited because this is our third annual symposium and now it's sort of turning into this yearly community event. And last year I was able to present as well, and you're going to get a little bit more this year. So I think everyone here knows who I am, but I don't know if everybody knows what my project is for my dissertation. And basically, I'm looking at the value of the education we're offering here in East-West psychology. And I'm doing that by exploring the experiences of our alums. And the method is a sequential mixed method. So there's going to be an initial phase that's happening right now. There's a questionnaire I've come up with, and it's been given. I'm trying to collect as many responses as I can. We have over 300 alums since our inception over 30 years ago, so it's pretty exciting. And if you're an alum, I would love to hear from you. But so the question that drives the research is, considering the experiences of East-West psychology alums, how have those who obtained their degree valued their non-traditional education, but specifically in the terms of how it's affected them personally and professionally? So I'm basically curious to see who you were before East-West psychology, what happened to you during the program, and where are you now? But before so I'm going to actually invite you to participate in a practice with me right now, before I go any further. And if you would, I would be honored. So I'm just going to ask you to close your eyes or soften your gaze. This sort of allows us to turn inward and relax our sensory experience somewhat. And as you're turning inward, I would like you to notice your breath. Following your breath is an active practice in being here now. Just notice how it feels as you inhale and exhale. And allow your breath to be your anchor through the rest of this practice. Invite you to bring your attention to your body. How do you feel in your body right now? What's your experience of sitting in your chair like? Just notice how you're feeling in your body without judging. Deep breaths, and as you exhale, release any tension you might have noticed in your body. Continue to notice your breath. Now now shift your attention to your mind. Notice the quality of your thoughts. As you witness your mind, treat yourself as a good friend. Unconditionally love yourself as you are. And without judgment, just watch. Just watch. Still being mindful of your breathing, I'd like to now ask you to shift your focus towards your whole being in its entirety. Notice the whole experience of being you right now. Just rest there for a minute. May we realize the richness of our heritage. May we fulfill the promise of our being. May we know peace within and without. And then as you feel ready, slowly come back into the room. So the reason why I wanted to offer you all an experience like that is because I wanted to give you a feel for an integral education rather than just tell you about it. But before I kind of articulate some of the characteristics of what an integral education actually is, I'd like to give you a bit of a historical context of what Brendan kind of started to do upstairs just a little bit ago. So as most of you know, as students at CIIS, we're offering an integral education. And what an integral education is rooted in is the work of two pioneers in the field of the evolution of consciousness. and that is, or those people are Aurobindo Ghosh, or more commonly known as Sri Aurobindo, and Mira Alfassa, and that is also known as the mother. And to Aurobindo, education was to be a living evocation of the powers of the mind, spirit, and will of the human being. And nowadays, unfortunately, in the mainstream education system, from my research and from my own experience, it's like we're talking heads on top of this meat body, and we need to learn things and tell them what we learned, and that's it. And that's kind of not what a living evocation of the powers of the human being look like to me. So these people have their own school in India right now, but how integral education got to CIIS was by a man named Heidi Fraser, which a lot of you probably have also heard about. And Fraser came to the U.S. first because he was invited by a professor from Stanford named Frederick Spiegelberg. And there was a school that was initiated before CIIS called the American Academy of Asian Studies. And so, with Aurobindo's blessing, Chaudhry came here to sort of spearhead the east of the east-west, I guess. And the American Academy of Asian Studies sort of fell away, but Chaudhry stayed here because he had founded this Cultural Integration Fellowship. And at the same time, he also founded the California Institute of Asian Studies, which of course is now California Institute of Integral Studies today. And I'm curious to see if our alums actually feel the roots of our program today. And I'm also curious to look at the whole trajectory. I mean, because part of my research has involved looking at all the old course catalogs and like the archives of the program, and it's been really interesting because to me there's this apparent evolution of the program. So I'm hoping to be able to better articulate that through my research as well. But so Chaudhry brought Aurobindo and the Mother's integral education to life through CIIS. But what does that look like? In theory, an integral education aims to draw forth the full potential of the human being, not just merely the intellectual potential. It's an education that strives to educate the whole person, and one that recognizes the multidimensionality of the personality. That's what I mean when I say whole person education. And more specifically, Chaudhry outlined that as we have the physical, we have bodies, we have a socio-ethical relational aspect of existence, not only in our communities, but in terms of the global community as well, as all being part of humanity. There's a instinctual and an emotional part of the personality. There's a cognitive, pragmatic, or rational part of the personality, which is mainly what's focused on today in the mainstream. And then there's also the mystical, spiritual, and humanistic aspect of personality. But so it's nice to talk about all these things, but is CIIS and East-West Psychology actually educating in a way that honors all these aspects? In my experience, I feel it's true. But that's why I want to do this study so much, because if these things are happening, why can't we share that with the world? And what's the value of it? I kind of got skipped around. Sorry, guys. So, with that said, it's like if there are educations like we're offering out there in the world, we should be exploring them and could have broader implications in the mainstream education system today if we could have a more balanced development of our students. And as Chaudhry asserted, without the balancing of the intellectual with the emotional, with the vocational, with the spiritual, with the technological, with the humanistic, we aren't able to be fully human. And I'll just end with a quote from Chaudhry. He said, "Out of the inner anguish of fragmented living, there is a passionate reaching for wholeness of being." And maybe an integral education is what we're reaching for. This is like a side note, it wasn't part of my presentation, but I am going to give a presentation at a conference in Vancouver this summer. It's called the International Conference on the Teaching of Psychology, and I'm really hoping to offer an experience because there's going to be like teachers there from all over the world, and so this is kind of like my side note to my presentation. I thought that having an experience would be a good segue into a talk, and maybe something they could take away and do something at their classrooms. Renee?
I am interested if you care to share
I would love to.
any of how your experience of the integral education is here. How has it affected you?
That's great, because I didn't know if I should make that part of the talk or not. So I'm kind of at once a true believer, but I'm also like trying to remain objective in this research, because I don't know, coming to CIIS and starting my work in East-West psychology sort of like made my life, you know, not like made my day, like made my life. It's helped me to sort of break out of, I didn't even know I had this idea of what life was until I came here and learned a new idea of what life could be. You know, we have this kind of thought that we have these set stages of development, like, you know, children, adolescent, adult. Then what happens when we're an adult, you know? We just work and then retire and then die. No, we can still continue to grow. Like, and so I think my experience here has helped me re-envision life as to be something like the opportunity to participate in the ongoing evolution of consciousness in every moment, rather than just, you know, kind of materialistic thought that I just mentioned. And not only that, but as I started my Ph.D. work, I feel like I have been given the chance to develop my writing and research and speaking skills and develop as like an emerging scholar potentially. And I'm really excited about learning about assessing programs, like what are student learning outcomes, what is being offered in the curriculums to achieve these outcomes, and then, you know, how can we as a department or even as an education system in the U.S. grow? You know, it doesn't have to just be, oh, we do this way and this is the way it's going to be forever. So, yeah, Larry?
I have a question. It sounds like you've sort of done the historical sort of view of CIIS in general, and do you know the conversation that happened around the change? It sounds like the same conversation that changed CIAS to CIIS is the same conversation we're having right now, right? So what was behind that? Why did it change from in East-West psychology to an integral for the name of the institution? And does that dialogue sort of speak to what we're talking about in our community right now?
Well, I mean, I'm still exploring the historical roots, but it was, yeah, they felt like, from my understanding, is that the Asian piece didn't cover everything that it was moving into. And so they changed it to integral, I think partly to honor, you know, the roots, but also to try and be more inclusive of what was coming up. So, yeah, as I discover more, I can keep you posted.
Yeah, please.
You have time still. Okay, you have 10 more minutes.
Have a day?
Oh, he's calling my name.
You're in the back.
Can you give us like a historical background of this research? I mean, has similar research been done out there that will ground what you're doing? Because in your intro you said that maybe we are doing something valuable here that we need to bring out there. So how do we know what's going out there? So I kind of want to have an idea of the conversation to see if we did that.
Yeah, so what I've discovered in my research is there have been certain little movements in the past 30 or 40 years in the, you know, at least in American higher education. Things like what's called perspective transformation, which is not necessarily an educational framework. It's just this gentleman named Jack Mesereau. He started noticing things in a unique classroom situation. He had this group of women who were returning to school, like after a long time away. And they were doing, you know, it was a small group, so it was kind of an intimate space. And what was happening as they were doing their studies is they were able to change their perspective as they got more knowledge about themselves and their peers. And by change their perspective, it's like, you know, maybe they noticed that you know, as a woman they were oppressed or something. So it was like they were able to expand somehow. And that's what he means by perspective transformation. And then a little while after perspective transformation, something called transformative education emerged, and the kind of guy that spearheaded that was named Robert Boyd. And so that takes perspective transformation kind of another step, because it brings a Jungian piece in by, you know, wanting to consciously integrate the many parts of the personality within the context of education. And then, you know, you all might have heard of these more recent ones like student-centered education or contemplative education, and those are kind of trickling into curriculums right now as well too. But what for me is important about an integral education is it encompasses all these newer models that have been emerging, but it's more. So it's like the whole is more than the sum of the parts. And in terms of previous research, I mean, no one's looked at CIIS, but what I am doing is looking at how programs have been assessed, and specifically there's an initiative going on right now. It's like specifically looking at graduate educations and what are the career pathways of, you know, and this is mainstream, this has nothing to do with CIIS. But it's just interesting because I just sort of fell into something that's kind of gaining speed, you know? So not only am I looking to map out the career pathways of our graduates, but it's like in the context of a different kind of education, a more innovative, inclusive education. So I am looking at other research, but I haven't found anything just like this.
I'm curious about how you're, what you're asking graduates, like with the questionnaire.
You mean the
kind of
questionnaire?
details, yeah.
Well, so the questionnaire came from, you know, me studying what we're advertising. It's it's also come from looking at all the old course catalogs, and it's also come from my own experience about what I feel like has happened to me. So kind of underlying the questionnaire, I have like on a personal level, interpersonal or relational level, and then a transpersonal level. So like, for example, it's a Likert scale. So it's like you're gonna agree or disagree with each statement. And like for example, one of the questions is, you know, I can relate to more authentically, you know, when I'm interacting with people. And I mean, I'm happy, I brought my questionnaire too, if you guys wanna like talk about it over lunch.
No, I would love that.
We should be closing after this last question, so.
Yeah, so there's 40 questions, and it's just trying to touch on, you know, what we're saying we're offering, and also the historical perspective, and also drawing from